I had one follower who told me that her boyfriend was told instead of coming in for his IV fluids after his chemotherapy, he would just have to do the best he could at home. And if he couldn't hold anything down, he'll go to the emergency department and then hopefully they'll find some.
Hospitals across the country are grappling with an IV shortage
after flood damage from Hurricane Helene halted production at this North Carolina plant owned by Baxter International, which makes 60% of the nation's IV fluid.
Like when a patient's blood pressure drops to 60/20, you want us to limit IV fluids and not give them a bolus, like use tap water?
Ma'am, I'm so sorry you haven't been able to keep anything down over the last 24 hours, but here's some Gatorade though.
Like what?
IV fluid is salt and water in a bag. It is insane that something so abundant would end up being in shortage.
Even more insane is the reason for the scarcity: greed. Just as hurricanes are driven by man-made climate change, this shortage stems from deliberate choices to concentrate control over essential medical supplies.
Sepsis, which is a huge bodily systemic infection where everything kind of falls apart in your body, the first treatment is aggressive IV fluid hydration. And you don't have IV fluids. We have to ration these. People may not make it.
Baxter says the facility will not be at full capacity until the end of the year, which is terrifying for American hospitals, who rely on Baxter and just 2 other companies for their IV fluid supply.
There are 3 major companies that produce the lion's share of all IV solution for the United States. The real big one is called Baxter International. There are 2 somewhat smaller companies, ICU and another company called B. Braun. So between those 3 companies, you're talking about just about all of the IV solution that's used in hospitals and clinics throughout the United States.
These 3 companies locked in their dominance through shady middlemen that control medical purchasing in America, group purchasing organizations, or GPOs.
It's essentially a co-op buying group. The GPO aggregates a bunch of hospitals and makes purchases of medical supplies with suppliers. 97% of all hospitals use a GPO to get their supplies. So that means that when there's a disruption, you're going to see that cascade across all of the hospitals in the network.
The majority of medical purchasing in the U.S. is controlled by just 4 GPOs: Vizient, Premier, Health Trust, and Intelare, who have made it impossible for hospitals and suppliers to function without them.
On the supplier side, the GPOs, they charge a lot of money to the suppliers in order to give them sole source contract. So in other words, if you're selling IV solution and you get a contract with one of the big GPOs like Vizient or Premier or Health Trust, you're the only company selling IV solution through that GPO. Because you're locked in from the hospital's perspective, if there's a disruption at a company like Baxter, they can't go to a second supplier. They are just going to have to sit and wait if Baxter can't supply them at 100% allocation.
I would love for government leaders and people in industry and in the pharmaceutical industry to really think about how we're doing this. Is this really the best setup?
Hospitals aren't innocent in all this either, because executives reap the benefits from their arrangements with GPOs.
The GPOs and the executives are in bed together to a degree in this market. Executives have been found in some published reports to be taking what they call share backs or certain fees that go directly to the hospitals and the hospital executives to essentially keep them in on the deal, right? It comes at the expense of patients who ultimately have to pay that price when, it's involved in their insurance premiums and things like that. And then when there is a shortage, the patients are definitely paying the price because they might have to delay their surgery or they might have to not get treatment for something that they really need treatment for.
In addition to airlifting IV bags from overseas, the Biden administration has invoked the Defense Production Act to speed rebuilding of the damaged Baxter facility. While these moves will inevitably speed recovery, they do nothing to address the root cause that all but guarantees this will happen again and again when crisis hits.
Until you change the market structure of this market, this is going to keep happening over and over and over again. It is absolutely incredible that 7 years ago, a hurricane hit a manufacturing facility making IV solution. 7 years later, the same exact thing happens, and we put no structures in place to kind of deal with this contingency.
Ironically, the monopolized market constraining supply was fueled by a 1986 anti-kickback law meant to stop healthcare providers from profiting off deals with suppliers. But the law included a safe harbor provision, which added special exemptions for GPOs.
Before 1986, GPOs were paid by the hospitals. So they had an incentive to keep costs down, and they had an incentive to have a robust market of supply. But now that they're paid by the suppliers, they have to give something to the supplier to make it worth their while. As a result of this, not only do the prices of what hospitals are paying for supplies generally go up relative to a competitive market, but we see a whole host of shortages throughout medical supplies in our economy.
None of this is inevitable. Just like the government created this problem, so too can they fix it.
We can remove the safe harbor. And if you do that, then GPOs are going to be paid by hospitals. And those hospitals, in exchange for that payment, might build in resiliency into the very structure of the market. The Federal Trade Commission is actually looking into GPOs, so we could see through antitrust enforcement a change in how this market conducts itself.
You just think, there's no way we could be here again. And yet here we are for literal, water, salt, some electrolyte solutions.
We know what to do. We know what the problem is here. We just seem to be convinced and determined to not learn anything from anything.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more Perfect Union in your feed. And if there's a story you'd like us to cover next, just drop them in the comments below.